Welcome to the Pretty Intense podcast. Today on the show is a girl that I've been following for a while now. She also wears the color red a lot. She has red hair. Her name is Gabi Kovalenko. She is really big on Instagram and YouTube, and it's growing very quickly. And she is 22, just about 23 years old. And when you start to hear her talk, you're like, wow, where the heck does that come from? She is, she's just one of those unique individuals that just gets it. She just understands how things work. And so she works in the area of energy a lot. And I'm going to read how she describes her work. She's a transformational thought leader who teaches a pro-consciousness approach to personal development and mindful living. For those of you who've listened to a lot of the interviews I've done, you'll understand this is the stuff that I ask a lot of questions about. I'm so fascinated with. So we talked about the matrix, we talked about consciousness and enlightenment and the ego, what the universe is, and then what the universe is, and how you can upgrade your life so that you become a match to the reality that you want. And essentially that's what it's all about, right? And it's not about, she says a beautiful line, I'm just going to call it at the beginning, pain is inevitable, but that suffering is a choice. Yes, there are things that aren't easy, but suffering is your choice. How you can align yourself and see the events from a higher perspective to have more peace about it. I hit the subscribe button. I really appreciate that. It shows me that you enjoy the content. Hit the bell for notifications. And as always, thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to hear this one. Yes, I wore red because, well, it's my favorite color. And I was almost going to put this on yesterday. I did a couple episodes yesterday and I was like, no, tomorrow I wear red. But I do have a theory that days have a color. And like, I noticed this in particular, like going to the gym, which I know we can totally talk about. But generally speaking, even at, I went to a golf tournament the other day and everyone was wearing green. And even my friend was like, wow, everyone's in green. And so I just have a theory that days have a color. So I wonder, since you work all in the sphere of energy and frequency, what do you think of that? And how does that play into energy and frequency?
I think there's a lot right there to unpack. First of all, I think we are all tied into the collective consciousness. So that's one massive concept that influences the way that we perceive reality and perceive ourselves. There's also nothing that is random. So many of us experience, a certain color that comes to mind, and everything that we do, I believe, plays into an intentional construct within our own minds. So if we wake up and all of a sudden we're drawn to red, there's probably a reason why we're feeling that. That may be an internal mood, a state that we're wanting to project openly, and it could be an emotion that we're maybe repressing that we're wanting to reveal outwardly. Or maybe it's something that the collective consciousness is going through. So maybe it's a collective mood or an energy that a lot of people are feeling, which is maybe why we both decided to wear red today. It could be, but I noticed you tend to match with the people that you do podcasts. You tend to wear the same color. So maybe you're synced up with your guest that you have on the day. I don't know, but it's very interesting. And I think it's part of just being very in tune to the current state. So a lot of us, when we really pick up energy and are perceptive of the different micro changes that we're feeling deep down, viscerally, then we'll start to express ourselves accordingly because of that. So it sounds like you're very attuned to energy and you're just flowing with, the day and the moments that arise.
Actually, that's for me. Like, I don't feel people's feelings, but I'm aware of them. My feeling comes in the area of frequency. So, and patterns generally, but frequency for sure. So even in my house, like I have 3 EMF reducing devices in my house. Like I took Wi-Fi out of my bedroom. I want to live somewhere with more, like a little bit further out of town, somewhere that there's more nature. Like I feel very sensitive to frequency. And so that then also transcends into people too, of course. I mean, not of course, but definitely, because we are such energetic beings and have so much power in that way. And so with people, I can also sense that. So if I can feel that there's something off and there's discord and there's not a match in their energy and the way they present, then I also get Well, I immediately know something's wrong. It also plays into when I meet someone or I'm meeting people, and I don't have to be Danica Patrick, the race car driver, which is just a role essentially. Like I know how to slot into that. It is me, but it's just this part of me. And so when I don't have to be that and I can just kind of relax and chill, I'm actually really quiet because I'm totally trying to see if the way that people present is the same as the frequency that they're emitting. And I didn't know that I was doing that until probably like 2 years ago or so. But that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to see if there's coherence and then how I want to deal with it. Do I want to just not talk to them? Do I want to totally dive in? Do I want to question them to some degree and kind of prove them out a little bit right there and then and there, which is a fun way to go, but not always the nicest.
You're an empath. It's very clear that you're very attuned to your environment. And a lot of us empaths, we have this ability to be very plugged into our surroundings. And the downside of that is we can become very hypervigilant to other energies and other frequencies at play. So I've noticed there is a dark side of the empath, which plays into the collective. There's a lot of empaths that are too hyper aware of their environment to the extent that they start to falsify themselves because they're responding to the environment when they don't necessarily have to. For example, I have clients that come to me, they're super empaths, they feel like they're always absorbing the energies around them. So for example, like a nurse who walks into a room, she feels her patient to the extent that she becomes her patient. She starts to merge with their field. She knows what they're going through. She feels their emotions. That can become very toxic and very difficult to always carry that burden of being plugged into the environment. So what can we do about that? I have blown people away because I told them that though you're an empath and you can feel the field around you, you can also shut out the ability to constantly let that field penetrate your own. Right? So there's a big difference between just taking in information and being able to process that information and create a barrier in between yourself and the environment. So what you can do is actually imagine that you can receive all the information eternally that exists outside of you, but also know how to filter it out by just deciding that you have a boundary around you. So with energy, it's very easy to learn how to filter it out simply by understanding that your own field is determined by everything that you decide to imbue it with.
It's an intention.
Exactly. We can decide to be this penetrating field that takes in everything around us, including the toxicity, including the low frequencies, or we can decide to keep that barrier. And when we set the energetic intention to have like a force field around us, a force field of light and love and our own, state of being, then we get to predetermine what our field contains. So I told that nurse that she no longer has to be dragged down by these frequencies around her. And she's like, oh my gosh, I can actually experience freedom because this means that I don't have to be the receiver of all that information. And truly, that's what we are. We're a receiver of information, right? We're an antenna. We're all these energetic vessels, but we all, to varying degrees and capacities, can take in information and know what to do with it. So many of us, we struggle because we're constantly taking information and think that we don't have any free will. We don't have the ability to filter out or set that boundary, which is why I think one of the most important elements of self-love is being able to set that boundary. It's knowing who you are and knowing who you are not. So though you are Danica, the receiver of information who gets to feel energy all the time, you get to decide who is going to leach energy into your field, who are you going to share energy with, and that toxicity you can just decide to not allow in. And that's the most loving thing you can do for yourself. And it's vital when you're an empath to know these boundaries, to know the standards of the energy you want to allow into your reality, which relates to relationships, all interactions, dynamics, and even receiving, psychic influences. So it's interesting. I know people who live in New York City, for example, and they say that I can't be in the city for too long because it starts to weigh down on me. Some people, they feel like they get tired. They feel too much of the, high frequency input that puts them in a gamma brainwave state and all of that. And they feel like they need to get out. At the same time, I know of shamans who live in New York City and who say that this frequency actually uplifts me. So the high frequencies are putting my brain into a super attuned state where I get to harmonize, I get to feel alive, I get to feel the masculine energy of the city, actually put me into a state of balance and puts me into like a wired state to achieve in life. So it depends on how we actually perceive the role of those frequencies around us. And even when it comes to red, I wear red often. I decided to get my hair red as I went through some personal shifts in my life. And I just felt really in resonance with that energy. But then I have people leave me comments all the time that are like, that red is a low frequency thing, and that's your root chakra, and that's not harmonic or spiritual. So it
Where's your
just goes to
purple?
show how, exactly, right? It's just a really subjective perception of the energy and the frequency, and there is no good or bad energy. It's all just energy, and every frequency plays into an infinite spectrum. So it just depends on the meaning that we assign to it.
Okay. Well, then that plays into a question that I was thinking about. And then you said nothing's good or bad. So I've always been really curious about anxiety and like how people really, really deal with like debilitating levels of anxiety. And I had not experienced anxiety. Well, I feel like anxiety is a little like an orgasm. If you're not sure if you have anxiety, you don't, right? It's kind of like an orgasm. And then once you experience real anxiety, you go, wow, I can't choose a good thought. I'm feeling my heart is racing. I feel my stomach is clenched up. Like there's like a whole visceral experience and an inescapable thought path. And so I had never experienced it until a few years back. And I had a few episodes, and I think it's only happened like once since. So I probably had it like 4 different times. I recognized, I think it was even like the second, third one, like maybe even all of them is what I'm thinking. Well, it's what I feel like is true to me, is that all of them weren't mine. But I don't absorb people's energy. So I don't understand why it happens sometimes. Is it because it's so strong that it comes into my field and that I actually gets through, or could it be like something else, another energy or entity sort of attaching in a way? Like, could this be more than just another human? Do you see what I'm saying?
So what was the source of the anxiety during the different episodes?
The source of it was someone else. It had to do with relationship. Every time it's had to do with relationship challenge.
Mm-hmm. Did it feel like you couldn't express yourself? Was there an anxiety with being yourself or speaking your truth to that person?
It was not
What
knowing
happened?
the truth. It was feeling
Not
like I
knowing the
didn't
truth.
know the truth, questioning the truth, feeling like I was getting information that was hurtful, but not knowing if it's true. Right? Because is it intuition? Mm-hmm. Is it just a story I'm telling myself?
So this comes down to, do you really trust your feelings? Or are your feelings the source of your anxiety? So a lot of us, we experience anxiety surrounding feeling something that we don't know how to express, when our own truth is something that we come into conflict with, because we think mentally that we need to act in a certain way in order to preserve ourselves in a certain situation. This is something that so many people struggle with. They feel one thing, there's an internal reality, but in order to express that means to go against everything that they have already externally manifested. So for example, you're in a relationship that doesn't feel good to you, but yet you wake up every morning and you do your best to put on a show to preserve that relationship. So you tell your partner certain things, you deprive yourself of your own needs, you say things that are in contradiction to your truth in order to just keep that going. So what are we actually doing at the end of the day? We are lying to ourselves, keeping ourselves in the dark in order to maintain some external reality that we think is going to suit us. But does it really? Usually that ends up resulting in anxiety, in depression, in suppressed feelings, in personal mistrust, and in quieting our inner voice because we don't believe that it deserves to be heard. Right? That is a really deep reality.
It's when we're in such dramatic contrast to our higher self's awareness and our own personal truth that the system goes.
Anxiety is telling us that we need to pay attention to ourselves. And yet we see it and we try to silence it even more. We think of anxiety as something that we need to just run away from. But similar to pain, it's a reality that means you need to listen more to yourself. A lot of people approach pain in that way too. They think that if I'm in pain, I need to try to shut those feelings down, try to do something to run away from myself, when in truth, it's the exact opposite thing. It's your self-consciousness of your internal system begging you for attention, wanting recognition, wanting you to actually go within and accept those feelings and somatic experiences. But what do we often do? We just keep going into the world and try to distract ourselves. We want to try the next thing to run away from our own truth and everything we know to be real for us deep down. That's the most degrading thing we can do.
Well, the last time it happened, I basically responded within, it probably was discomfort for like 30 or 40 minutes. And then I ended up sending a message being like, I'm having like a somatic experience. My body's freaking out. I know it's not, I said, it doesn't feel like mine. I don't know what's is something going on? Is there information in the field coming to me that is not yet in my conscious awareness that lands in the subconscious or in the energy body that tells me something that is not yet arrived up here in the brain?
Well, really, they're all entangled, right? Your soul, your heart's consciousness, your higher self, that knowing that's in the field. Basically, you know who you are at your core. You could feel that by connecting to your heart, by just being with yourself, feeling that information, but it's also something that is in the field. Because you could say that in the holographic field around us, there exists really a true version of us, the soul that is non-local. So you could be picking up that information as you're entangling with your higher self. That's coming through intuition, through subtle cues, which a lot of people wonder, what's the difference between then fear and intuition? If intuition can come in the form of fear when we feel like we're out of alignment with our higher self. So that's something to really look for too, because fear in the mind is usually the opposite of intuition. But something that feels like fear, because when you're in your heart, you feel out of alignment with something you're dealing with externally, could be the intuitive cue you need to go back within and connect to that source of truth, which is either internal or you could say external, but not relating to the people around you that are, trying to get you out of alignment. So this is really a question of whether or not we want to come back home and know who we are and do what's right for us, to connect with that frequency of just pure integrity and truth.
This seems like the answer for everybody would be yes, right? I feel like everyone would say, I want to know the truth. I mean, I don't think everyone's prepared to deal with what that means, but I think everyone would. So what blocks that? Like, what is it that doesn't allow someone to step into a deeper knowing and sense of truth and sense of self?
It would be the harsh reality that everything that you're experiencing now is due to you depriving yourself of that truth. Once you step into the truth, you have to be accepting of everything that you've done that is in opposition to it. And so we go into this cognitive dissonance state. We go into the state that we have to now be responsible for everything in our reality that we dislike. And we have to take ownership over these parts of us that we've kept in the dark and we've denied our truth, which turns into our shadow, and it turns into the repression of all the emotions that really are deep down telling us what our personal truth is saying. And so externally speaking, when it comes to things happening in the world, which we often, turn our attention away from, the same thing holds true. We don't want to see the reality because that would mean accepting everything that is also teaching us the deeper lessons about ourselves. And we don't want to harmonize because that means having to reconcile the parts of us that we have not seen, we have not understood. And so this is what, makes people go into these repeating cycles of constantly manifesting the same situations, dealing with the expression of their shadow because they're all the time just trying to deprive themselves of that truth. And it's easier for people to sort of live a lie than to look in the mirror and to figure out what is it that's causing the expression of these things that I dislike. But then that means not trying to run away from them anymore. So to truly embody the truth means having to meet everything that you've been wanting to suppress. It's wanting to see everything in your reality as an expression of you, which could be the most difficult part, because we want to say that, certain things we're not responsible for. Some things are just, part of suffering and the universe's test for us. But it's a matter of how do we respond to that? And do we want to respond truthfully or keep ourselves in this loop of just believing that the universe is working against us?
Because truthfully might mean the end of a relationship, the end of a friendship, the end of a job, the end of where you live, the end of how you go about your life, certain habits and hobbies you have. And, as I say so often, and had to say it to myself in the past, is that your new life is going to cost you your old one.
Exactly.
And that's a hard thing for people to. And I think there's a deep attachment that people have to, I can feel it in the energy of like Joe Dispenza's book title, like Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, but in this sort of changing of personality or like becoming someone different. It's like there's a real loyalty to the persona that someone has created for themselves that they don't want to abandon. There's like a certain, they feel like that's the wrong thing, that's not somebody loving them just the way they are, or they feel like it is somehow just not like that it's an abandoning of the personality.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's a coping mechanism, really. It's a defense mechanism.
Oh,
It's
it's
kind of like
just sort of
during
the
COVID.
ego's story they tell you to go like, oh no, this is who you are.
Right, which is the most pervasive image of who we are. We start to have a love affair with this ego because we think that it's what we need to sustain our sense of self. Because
Mm.
what's true deep down, if we keep going deeper and deeper past those layers of falsity and, self-image, things that we fabricate in order to believe that that is who we are, is a totally fluid essence. At the core of it is no essence at all. I mean, everything is just pure energy, pure potentiality, pure consciousness. So when it comes down to that infinite potential of ourselves, we want to fragment it. We want to bring it into some kind of constructs that we believe make us more relatable, more appreciable, more loved. All the while, this is something that we developed when we were still so young that we didn't
Hmm.
have a sense of identity. And so we learned to take these mental constructs and turn them into ego constructs. And you're so right. Like personality is something that could be completely fluid, except we don't want that to be because we think that it's unsafe to go into the world in a fluid way and to just meet the demands of life without being necessarily fixed in our own identity.
So consistency is something that I feel like the ego, or in this human experience, we tend to lean into, right? We want to make sure that we're safe in
Mm-hmm.
whatever way that is, through personality disorders, through the hobbies and habits we have, the friends we keep, the relationships we attract. But it doesn't always mean it's to something good. It's just consistency. So
Right.
what challenges are inherent to this reality that we are in? And is that even true? Are there certain things is there anything inherent, or is this whole thing transitory and we can shift and transcend it into something completely different called the human experience?
Right. The inherent nature of it is that we were born into a third dimensional construct where we believe that we need to be submitting to this construct. And so when we get into the spiritual sense of, wanting to transcend, wanting to enlighten, wanting to become the fifth dimensional consciousness, we can come into an awareness of what it means to live outside of the box, outside of the matrix game, which means learning to see outside of the program. But to transcend that isn't necessarily to not exist within it. So for as long as we're here, we're existing within the matrix, right? Within the third dimensional reality. So what our consciousness knows is that there's constantly these boundaries that we're up against. We're up against boundaries of time, which our mind can recognize, but we know that time is also transcendental in nature. But we have to learn how to work with those constructs, just like we have to learn to integrate duality. Duality is a construct within the third dimensional consciousness. We know that everything has a plus and minus, positive,
Right.
negative charge, right? That's not something that we can transcend. If we know love, we're also going to know pain. If we know
Yeah.
sadness, we're also going to know happiness. We have to learn to experience and love that balance. So that's inherent to us. But there is something very pervasive to being within the matrix and wanting to conform to it. That is what the collective mind tends to do. People tend to be as one with the herd. They want to do the same thing that everybody else does. There's this mentality that, we need to believe what everyone else believes. And so it's very difficult to learn how to transcend when we look around, everyone's doing a certain thing. And we can see this collective consciousness playing into all historic trends, everything from, fashion to food to the latest diet to exercise trends. People are constantly playing into some trend created by someone who wants us to
Sure.
think and feel in a certain way. And when we don't doubt that, we're always going to be doing what everyone else does in the matrix, playing a game, fulfilling some role, and not really knowing who we are because we're just adapting to the concept of life within the matrix. When we start to recognize that this is the matrix game and we're a unique individual that really exists outside of the matrix, we were born to come into here to recognize that this is what's happening, but really all the world's a stage. For us to recognize who we are and learn what role do we really want to embody. Is it this person who is just operating by a script written by somebody else? Or perhaps are we someone who can recognize this game for what it is and learn to operate outside of it? So when we do that, when we step into that mentality of true awareness and awakening, then there becomes a reality where we exist outside of the matrix. What does that mean? It comes through in discernment, in being able to see, okay, certain things might have been taught to me, told to me, but I don't need to conform to those mental boundaries. And when you can exist outside of the mind's makeup and the mind's matrix of its own, there are different constructs which come into play. You can start to see that time is transcendental. You see the soul is transcendental. And more importantly, you see that your entire identity is transcendental. That you chose this embodiment in order to learn yourself through these different situations, interactions, people. And you chose your parents and you chose your upbringing and all these things that you believed existed outside of your free will, because within the matrix programming, you thought that you didn't choose any of it. But in reality, from an eternal perspective, your soul wanted this experience in order to understand itself more fully. So operating from that mindset gives you an ability to expand even more and to think about, how can I design this game? How can I actually embody what unity consciousness means, which is that I'm not separate from the matrix at all. The matrix conforms to my own perception of it, which means that you as a soul have the ability to understand that you are a fractal of source consciousness. If everything is just consciousness, then consciousness created the matrix in order to make the illusion of it very real, to make people wonder, can I exist outside of it? And what is all this even for? And when we get to that point, we can really see how there is no ego at all. And all of these disorders and different issues that people are dealing with are really just aspects of you not knowing that you don't have to conform to the matrix, which means you don't have to conform to your past. You don't have to conform to what your mind tells you you are. You don't have to look to the media and believe everything that you were told. You can really start to believe that you are a free, sovereign being governed by the universal one. And you can take that consciousness into a completely new experience and just start to play with it. And existing in that reality where you are the mind, you're as one with the cosmic mind, and a higher intelligence brings you this truth that really there is no attachment other than what you decide to attach yourself to. And that's a game changer, because then we can operate with love, with freedom, with virtue and dignity, and really know that we are the creator of this experience. So why not make it the most fluid, harmonious experience that we can, which really frees the ego and it gives us a new dimension of perception where we're not clingy and hung up on these things that have happened to us, and we're much more focused on how can we optimize, how can we bring into this world what we want to see in it. And that's really being kind of as one with reality as opposed to in opposition to it.
So are you saying that everything in the matrix, like there's the matrix or these dualities, polarities are aspects, but you're not of them? I mean, because they feel like they're very real.
It's completely real. If we can perceive it, it is real. We can't just say that it's all an illusion. Or we can also say that all dualities are as real as non-duality. Both truths are the truth. If we can start to see how truth is really the sum of all truths, we can get closer into what that fifth dimensional consciousness is exploring. But since we're still third dimensional beings, everything that appears to be real for us is real, which is why we can't negate any perspective. We can't say that someone's wrong and someone's right. Everyone's right in their own way, which means that the only way to truly tap into truth is to see how integration, or that summing up of our perspectives, brings us closer to the reality of oneness. So masculine and feminine exist in order for us to explore these fundamental differences in charge and polarity in our third dimension. If we zoom into zoom out into the universal mind, those polarities really cease to exist. Everything is just one at that level. But that wouldn't be very interesting for the purpose of exploring consciousness and knowing what it means to contrast, to experience differences, for a woman to know what it means to meet a man and to experience the differences in their own fields. Source had to differentiate into all these fragments in order to learn what combination means, to understand the merger of divine consciousness.
Is there some kind of overlay that's testing us in some kind of way? Or is this merely vibration and frequency morphing and intersecting with things? And as it kind of morphs, perhaps the test gets more intense until there's a lesson, and then there's a shift in the frequency, and then do you see what I'm saying? Are there tests from another level of beyond us, an overlay that's affecting us? Or is this merely it's all one field of frequency, and we're just kind of waving in and out of our own little area?
Well, I think they're both true, really. Everything is just quantumly entangled, which means both realities that you just described are true. Everything has to exist on some kind of continuum, which means that even what we perceive to be the past is part of the future, right? They're both entangled, which means that the higher dimensions might just be higher frame rates of consciousness. We're at a lower frame rate, so which means we can't perceive the truth at those higher frame rates.
Oh
It's just
my
like
God.
somebody who's like super awakened and super aware and knowledgeable could really regurgitate this information very quickly. They could see it fast because they're responding based on their own brain's ability to just to be with it. So it's very fast for them. Meanwhile, someone who's on a slower frame rate of consciousness, we could say, is just observing the reality at only their limited degree of perception. So they can't see all the waves. They can't see all the frequencies, which is also why, very literally, people who are more plugged in, who access those higher states of consciousness, they are more attuned to the whole spectrum of frequencies. They are more of the empaths. They can feel more. They could see more, which is why psychedelic substances, make us also more in tune to the point that we can see at those different, like through the veil. We could see the different colors. We can see the hallucinatory experiences, even without the psychedelics, through our own mind's eye, through the pineal gland, through connecting to the scalar field and picking up that information like an antenna, which means you're really just raising your frequency to the point that you are operating at that higher dimensional level, even here on the third dimensional plane. So maybe that's what it takes for us to transcend. It's understanding how can we unlock the door through our own consciousness in the 3D in order to understand how do we even end up in the 5D plus to begin with. What if this was the first step? What if the higher dimensions are really our future? What if that's what it took for consciousness to learn how to build the ladder in order to access its infinite potentiality? Kind of like a kindergartner going through, an adult in life, having to go through the stages of awareness and disintegration and wars and fighting and polarities and then, eventually merging into the infinite one again. It's all happening at the same time, simultaneously, this beautiful divine, game. That's coming back to the same truth of oneness.
I kept thinking of a story when you said frame rates of eating an edible, THC edible for one of the first times. And I was cracking up and I'm like, I'm missing frames. And that's all I kept saying. I was like, I'm missing frames. And it's like, no, really, like, it's like, I'm seeing like life and then all of a sudden I miss a few frames and then it kind of comes back and I feel like there's just like missing frames, but that is how it's working, right? Like it's just explain more about that. Go further into frame rates and how that plays into our perception of reality.
Yeah, we could say that when we were born, we had like a very slow frame rate. We couldn't really understand too much. We were just observing and waiting for the experience to fill us with the ability to perceive it, which is why we take in information very fast when we're still, little kids who are very observant and just ready to understand the reality around us. And through the programming, eventually we get to the point where we can observe reality at a certain frame rate, which tends to be kind of the status quo, the collective consciousness level, which is a lot of people just taking in information selectively based on what they are given. And that's a very kind of modified ability to perceive at large. When we start to ask deeper questions, when we start to come into alignment with ourselves, and like you said, even being able to discern between fear and having interactions tell us that there's a higher self maybe, or possibly a different reality than the one that we're experiencing that exists internally or outside of us, that puts us in the position to tap into those higher frame rates of consciousness. When we start to have more information coming in, when we start to listen, the intuition that can flood us is also us being able to connect to those higher frame rates of consciousness. So it's really just being able to perceive that reality exists on this kind of accordion that consists of different frequencies, different levels, different paradigms, and all of us are existing in a paradigm of our own. But we can always change the frame rate. If we decide that we're curious and we want to learn more and we want to receive more answers, us just setting that energetic command opens up our field to receive more information and more clarity. What it takes is often such a subtle cue, just deciding that we're ready, or deciding that we want to change, or deciding that we're ready to be more conscious and we don't want to live within this kind of a matrix trap that many people find themselves in, but think that they're trapped, which just creates the trap for themselves. The truth is we are free, and there was never kind of a box to begin with. So thinking outside the box is realizing that the box is entirely an illusion. And so you can exist whatever frame rate you want to. You can be as free as you want to. But we so often believe that because everybody else is limited, we have to exist in a limited paradigm, which is ultimately the thing that we need to disintegrate, is this notion of stuckness and being constricted by some construct that is outside of us.
So what do we become next?
we can become as one with everything, which is the most kind of transcendental awareness that we could have. I mean, of course, there's a self. The reality of the self can't be ignored. We came in here in order to experience who we are, to know that we have something unique to bring into the world. We have our own gifts, our own talents, our own desires. When we start silencing those things, we just become like everyone else. When we come into this reality of we could be anyone that we want to be, and we're truly as one with the all, then a whole new reality begins to awaken within us. We might start changing our job. We might start doing things completely differently. Like you said, changing our relationships. Find ourselves surrounded by completely new people and situations because we just plug into that true source of who we are. And really, there is no ego at the core. The ego is just the chosen identity. So the self is something that is really magical. It's what the soul is characterized by. And it's who we are at our core. So to tap into that authenticity means that we're actually doing what we're meant to be doing here, which is arguably the reason why we're actually here. We must have some innate purpose and a reason why we chose to embody this physicality in order to, experience this entire creation, or something to learn. There has to be a deeper lesson. And when we start asking ourselves, really, why are we experiencing this? Why us? Instead of why is this happening to us, why is this happening for us? We can start to see life as a gift given to us and chosen by us to create the most potentiality. We can start to play. We can start to, curiously explore different possibilities. Like you are such a great example of someone who just asked these deeper questions and, is now experiencing a totally different reality than you once were.
Wow.
Could you ever imagine when you were a race car driver that you'd be doing this today?
I mean, people have asked, like, have you always been into this? Or your interviews seem very deep. Is this new? And I'm like, no, like, it's not, but there was never a time, space, and a place for it. Like since probably from 2015-ish on, but really got going more in 2017. I retired in 18. I mean, it is part of what pushed the retirement, I think, for me, or, leaving that behind. And was that I just wasn't syncing with my environment as much. I was feeling how uncomfortable it was for me. It just, the energy of the people, the environment, it just wasn't comfortable anymore. And so when I sort of let it go and let it be whatever it was going to be, it left. And, but I think about the way that I think now and the things that go through my head now. And I'm like, I don't think about, my brain doesn't work even close to the way it used to. Like the thoughts that go through my head all day, every day, I would say they must be, and I'm just trying to give my old self a little credit, of a little staying power, but because again, I'm attached to some degree to that personality, right? Maybe 10% of the same, but maybe 5% of the same, but the rest of it is totally different, totally new. And, we really operate much more like a computer than anything, right? We don't have to be the same thing we were. Neuroplasticity and reprogramming the way that we think is completely within our control. So why has that been a veiled sort of truth to us? Why is it that everything is coming through so much now? And I was just thinking a couple minutes ago about talking about time, we're talking about reality, and we're talking about transcendence to some degree. And so it's like, and frames per minute, frames per second, and like the framework that we see, the speed of frames, and like how time and where we are in the universe and what's happening feels like it's very accelerated right now. So maybe the question to go to, because there was a lot in there, is what is happening energetically with the planet right now?
We're going through a massive upgrade, which is something that has happened, and history sort of loops on itself just like time does. So periodically, we have to go through these sort of recalibration cycles and moments, these pivotal periods when we get to, I see it as a critical mass point, when there's too much of the same old, there's too much of a buildup of certain energies, certain themes going on in the collective, and there has to be a breakdown of those recurring patterns and cycles. There has to be a reboot, an opportunity for people to come into alignment with something completely different. So the collective doesn't really want to be experiencing the same thing, just like energy is always shifting and moving. Yeah. It's entirely fluid, like everything else, right? Even in nature, we see these trends and themes occurring all the time. There can't be a buildup of something. Ecosystems eventually transform in some ways, animals move. There's always some kind of dynamic motion happening. So the same thing occurs at the cosmic level, at every level of the organism up to the collective consciousness, right? So we are going through some kind of time of change, which is forcing us to look more into that duality that's at play, more at the individual level, and then bridging that into the collective mind, which is something that happened, clearly with the pandemic. So many people were forced to look within when they ended up at home, which is a very uncomfortable reality to experience, but also taught so many people about that truth, that there is a difference between just living the life that we thought that we were supposed to live and entering a state of forced isolation, or maybe that's really just coming home to who we really are, which took a lot of people into the transition period. Do you want to keep doing what you've been doing, or do you want to live a completely different reality? And at that point, it's really up to you. The choice is apparent.
So collectively, generally, on this planet, there's an upgrade happening. But is there potential within the individual to decide to go a different direction, meaning ascend, raise your frequency, or can they actually go the other way? Mm-hmm. Or is it staying static and then the contrast becomes more dramatic?
Totally a choice. You can always evolve or devolve at any time. And that's where you're currently at. That might not seem to be a choice, but usually it's when it doesn't seem to be a choice that you're actually devolving or you're just staying stagnant. Yeah. But if you can see that there is choice at play, you can make different choices on a day-to-day basis. And it's in these micro adjustments that you make even just mentally. Being able to free yourself from feeling like there's no ability to choose differently. It comes down to this sense, and a lot of people are struggling because they believe that there is no free will, which is something very, deep. We can argue about this. It's a bit of a paradox in itself because there is and isn't free will. Just like everything, there has to be the two sides to the same coin. From a higher self level, maybe we had the free will to choose this experience. Maybe this is a chosen assignment for us to figure out how much do we want to evolve given certain circumstances, given certain experiences that we chose. But down here, we don't know that. When we realize that there is a choice, there emerges a new reality. There's a different version of ourselves that we can contact. And maybe there's even a future self that knows that we have the ability to choose differently, which comes into some interesting topics of, parallel realities, different timelines, being able to quantum jump.
With plant medicine, I would say the most I would describe this is that to me, it feels like when you go in, your reality on the inside and the outside are somewhat matching. And then you go and do a ceremony of some kind, and then they don't match up at all anymore. And so I call it like you're jumping timelines a lot, and it takes a while for your reality to catch up with what you've just experienced and now what you know and what is embodied within you, because you've been there, you've seen it, you've felt it, you've cried through it, you've purged through it, you've really embodied that a different reality. So it's probably the area of quantum physics that I get the most confused about is dimensions and timelines. I can regurgitate it, but can't see it clearly. So I would love for you to explain how that all works. And, even perhaps in that example, what's going on?
So I think for ease of understanding this and for everyone watching, it's easy to understand the concept looking back. So in retrospect, we can imagine different versions of ourselves throughout our lives. Versions where we're slightly different, we're doing different things, we're feeling a little bit different, maybe when we had less information about who we are, or we understood a little bit less, especially if we're at this more awakened level now. There's a lesser awakened version of ourselves that we can remember. That reality is still real. So we can imagine what happened when we were at the fork in the road that made us take certain choices and go down a different route. We can say, arguably, that those versions of us still exist. And perhaps if we hadn't made the choices to take us where we are today, we would still be that version of self. So we can play with this a little bit and think as a thought experiment, what if they do? What if those versions of us are still alive and well, and they're going down a different route, experiencing a different fate of their own. Maybe we experience an ultimate fate in this lifetime, but there's different routes in order to get there. Maybe there's different timelines where we have more or less bumps in the road, more or less challenges, where we awaken slower or faster, experience different frames of consciousness along the way, meet different characters, operate with different frequencies and mindsets, ultimately to get somewhere. So maybe point A and point B are the same. In between, what's occurring simultaneously are different realities in which we're these different versions of ourselves operating under different mental conditions, all to get to where we need to be. So to jump the timeline, we have to understand that that future self that we want to experience, it's also occurring right now. In order to embody that future self, we have to think about, what is that future self doing? What is it feeling? What is it thinking? What reality is it experiencing? What frequencies exist in that realm? What are we doing now that does not align with that future self? And we start to think about, really, what is our self? What is the sense of self that we believe defines us? What is permeating our entire world right now if we consider the entire reality around us to be a projection of our own subconscious mind? We have to start to understand, what is in the subconscious mind. What is it made of? What are we not seeing that is projected all around us? And that puts us into the position of having to really reverse engineer our reality from the standpoint that it's everything in our mind that is comprising our entire world. So if we want to quantum jump, we have to identify certain factors currently at play that we maybe don't want to experience. So maybe you want to jump into a reality where you have an improved relationship, or you're more abundant, or you're happier in some way, or you're healthier. So that means you have to be forced to think about what made you unhealthy, or what made you unhappy, or what put you in the place right now where you want to change those things. Now you're simultaneously operating in three different observed states. You're seeing the present moment, you're seeing where you once were that put you in the present moment, and you're thinking about where you have to be one day, which means tuning yourself to a whole different reality. And you're actually existing in these three different standpoints of your own consciousness. Now your consciousness is really just one vessel. It's one soul frequency, which exists outside of all of these three third-dimensional experiences. But in order to quantum jump, you have to sort of get to that transcendental state where you realize, I am not this that I currently am. I am not my past, but I can be whatever future I want to experience when I really jump onto that timeline. And this is what emerges from this, quantum creativity standpoint, that you can really play with your mind, tweak your thoughts, fantasize about a totally different reality based on your different thoughts and your ability to side with a different version of yourself, which makes you dismiss certain things in the past, which puts you into the present moment of deprivation and resistance, and that puts you on a totally different timeline going forward. Many people have experienced, totally spontaneous manifestations of healing, miraculous healing, different things in their life where they realized, oh my God, the past was never even attached to me to begin with. They cure themselves of unknown maladies. They didn't know why they manifested them in the first place. They experienced massive shifts in their relationships. They have miracles come in terms of money, finance, their career, and all because they started to entertain a totally new possibility. So with quantum physics, the whole premise is that reality is fluid. It's a very spooky quantum realm because observation is really what determines the outcome. So if we think about it from that standpoint, if we don't know what's in our subconscious and yet our subconscious is projecting our reality, then we need to learn to observe the subconscious, to illuminate the subconscious mind and to make the subconscious conscious that will allow us to understand what expectations are creating our world. Because we know from quantum physics that when we change the expectation and the observation, the outcome also changes.
It feels like we can't see ourselves. I can see people. Like I get it. I see their patterns. It seems obvious to me. I pick up on the frequency, and like the whole puzzle feels very obvious. It's like a kid's puzzle to me. But it doesn't feel so obvious. And there's always, I'm like, I wish I could see myself as easily as I see other people. So it feels to me like we're this mini universe of source trying to experience itself, right, on a micro level to the macro of supposedly source fractioning off to experience itself, learn, grow, and just know itself. Like that's our own little world too. Like everything around us is informing us of us. Is this an accurate assessment?
think that's beautifully put. That's a very enlightened, aware realization about how the entire universe is a reflection of you, of your experience. So of course there's more to the universe than we can see. But what we're experiencing in our own matrix of our mind is a reflection of ourselves. This is why when we change certain aspects of ourselves or we see ourselves more fully, everything seems to transform, and very quickly, because we're just becoming accepting and aware in our observation. So the same thing goes for quantum physics. It all plays into the same concept of what consciousness is and why does it even need to experience itself. You know, in the whole scientific community, this is a major question, the hard problem of consciousness. Why does it need to exist? Like, what's the point? Consciousness is this thing that has a very transcendental nature. It's truly a cosmic enigma, right? Why does it need to know itself? It's this substance that makes up all things, that lives within every animal, every tree, our own observation, within the water. Every single thing is alive and it's operating as one with this cosmic mind. So the only feasible answer is that it really needs to observe itself. It needs to learn through interaction with everything else. What is the point of existence? What is the beautiful harmony of coexistence? What does it mean to love? What does it mean to go into the experience of completely being as one with everything else? And that beautiful experience of oneness is what we can experience when we detach from the separateness of I am my own ego and everything else is somehow a separate construct. It's really not. If you are consciousness, then we have to come into this awareness that we are just the same thing that everyone else is made of. Literally nothing is different, which forces us to think totally differently about all things.
Where does religion fall into all this? Because it feels like there's been a lot of wars over that. It feels like they're very divisive and judgmental, even though the whole thing is about love each other. It's like, except for if you believe this, then you have to feel bad for them because they're going to hell. It's like, where did religion come into all this?
Religion was a divide from the truth of the essential oneness that originally existed. It was created by mankind in order to create this matrix construct, to teach a story about oneness while keeping people fragmented away from it.
To teach the story. It's almost like a test.
Right. It's a test of what are you really conforming to? As you listen to this story, what is it teaching you about yourself? Is it putting you in a state of even deeper polarity? As you learn about these constructs and the deeper elements of the story, are you actually learning love? Are you learning to unify? Are you learning about oneness and what that represents? Or are you just being stuck in a distorted version of the truth, which is that everything is one? How does that feel within us? When religion turns people against each other, we could say that there is some distortion coming in. Technically, religion should put an end to all wars and it should make people unified and result in utopia, right? But we know that's not happening, which means that this clash, this fragmentation is just another way that consciousness has fragmented itself to maybe make people consider, do we need religion to learn the one truth? And there are religions that are now proposing a different reality, like omnism. It's speaking to the fact that all truths are the truth, which is a beautiful conclusion, right? We could see truth in every one. It's great. Yeah, and it resonates really with people who are open-minded, who want to really exist outside of just one version of truth. And we want to see the meaning behind all of these systems. But many are archaic, and many have led to all of these wars and things that are just putting people in opposition to each other, which we know doesn't really represent why we're here. Yes. So why follow something that is putting more oppression into our divine creation?
That's so simple to just look at everything like trying to understand itself, question to lead to questioning anything other than oneness with anything. So that leads me back to my favorite fun topic, which is relationships. And it always feels like those seem to be the most stirring. So why is it that relationships pull us sometimes into our darkest places? Intimate relationships.
Mm-hmm. I think they're most filled with the lessons in our realities. Basically, every relationship, it's the most telling thing about yourself. What are you really attracting? It's the best way to look in the mirror through the eyes of another person and how you're experiencing them and how they're experiencing you. Right? Every single thing in a relationship is part of the expression of your own dynamics within yourself. So your partner ends up being your greatest teacher. They're either loving you into loving yourself even more, or they're teaching you how to love yourself to a point of maybe losing that attachment and learning to attract someone even better. But every relationship, it teaches you to be intimate with yourself. If there is intimacy present in the relationship, you can learn yourself to an extent that you would not learn through anyone else. Because through the partner, you're able to see the divine mirror of consciousness. You're able to understand the polarity game within you.
What is the magic sauce in that, though? Because you've got friends, you've got parents, you've got whatever, but like that dynamic seems to be the most triggering. So what gets stirred within us that makes it so potent?
It's got to be the dance of the masculine and the feminine, which exists within every single person. It's an energetic duality that we need to come to reconcile. Everyone wants, the masculine and feminine within them to meet, because if that were to be a harmonic reality within us, we would have the dream relationship. We would understand what it means from the feminine aspect to feel, to experience the soft, warm energy of reality, to be compassionate, to be empathetic, to be loving, to be accepting, receptive, and to experience the masculine reality, which is much more of a go-getter, action-oriented, alive, dynamic force, which allows the two to really come into union. There has to be an invitation from the feminine to the masculine to allow that exchange to occur. So men often are seeking a woman to just play the feminine role while they can continue to be very dominant men, but they also need to experience the reality of the divine feminine within them. And so many women are, sort of taking a more oppressive approach when it comes to like, I want a man, but I don't know if I could have a man that really loves me the way I need to be loved, because they're so dominant in their own masculine energy that they just aren't inviting the right man in. We have to be aware of what our energy is actually saying. A man needs to be slightly on the dominant side of the masculinity, but have a really healthy dose of femininity in order to be able to caretake the feminine, to be responsive to feeling, to know the truth within his own heart, to experience that heart-based consciousness, and not just be this, very cold warrior. In reality, there's too many people that are just acting out of this, strong-willed capacity to fight, to just live and survive. Same as women need to be able to warm up to their feminine essence and be that warm container for the masculine, but at the same time have enough will and strength to not feel like they need a man to define them. And so it's when a woman can hold her boundaries and know herself and have that healthy balance, and a man can, that we can invite those people into our lives that reciprocate those energies and put us into, the perfect state of harmony. But many people enter relationships because they want that to be filled without them doing the work. They want to find a man who completes them because they don't have enough inertia and initiative in their lives, just like men want a woman to maybe to be a doormat, to just, to take care of his needs, and while he doesn't really want to put into the work to caretake her as well. A man has his own natural capabilities, and it's something that we all come into this world knowing subconsciously, where a man has responsibilities, has a drive, has an ability to be the guardian that a woman needs, to feel like she could be a woman. But arguably both need to first embody their true essence for the other to come in. So a woman needs to be a woman, needs to experience her femininity and her power as the divine feminine in order to manifest that relationship with the divine masculine. It's when either is off balance that the wrong relationships come into play, and then these power clashes and fights happen in the dynamics between women who just have that internal imbalance going on and men who have that same kind of inner imbalance. Both partners then try to change each other, try to, fight each other's external polarity differences, but really they're just fighting the inner fight. What's expressed externally and is just the need to come into within themselves and understand, what are they really missing internally? Where does a woman need to be more of the provider for herself? And where does a man need to be more sensitive to the emotional experience so that they could show up that way for their partner? And that's how we really end the polarity war. If we can show up to our relationships knowing that our partners are just mirroring the reality that we're experiencing. And the less balanced we are internally, the more imbalance we're going to manifest in order to understand, where do we need to heal? Where do we need to recognize and see ourselves, which is often what we also don't want people to see about us, which is the number one issue with intimacy. It's wanting to be intimate on some physical level, wanting to attract partners to make us feel better, but then not being truly intimate within ourselves, which means we're just going to attract more people, think that, more relationships is going to solve the problem. We're showing up superficially, with someone is going to solve the problem, but really we all want and crave that deep intimacy, which only comes through self-love, through true validation of ourselves, and the acceptance that no one can provide us, which allows us to then achieve the alchemy within that results in the alchemy with someone who's ready with us.
I had this beautiful EMDR session where I went into an experience that happened and watched how it went and the choices I made. And basically within it, the lesson I learned was that when I was in integrity and when I held boundaries and when I took care of my inner child or higher self, nothing in my physical reality really affected me too much on an emotional level, because I had chosen, I was in the best relationship I could possibly be in. And I was in resonance with my truth, with my higher self. And it was such a beautiful example and reminder of how when we are connected to ourself, when we're balanced within, when we're listening to our truth, that our outside reality isn't as triggering. It isn't as emotional. It isn't as charged, because we've chosen that relationship within. So if you choose the relationship with you and you as the number one, could you essentially make any relationship work? Or is that just mean that when you do that, you now come into a vibrational frequency to align with someone at that same level?
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. I think people who are really self-aware, do a lot of self-reflection, know who they are, and have these really strong boundaries, they're going to be way more selective about the partner that they're with. Because part of coming into this conscious realization of yourself means being very conscious of who you share energy with, seeing sex as something very sacred, as a conscious field blending exercise, knowing that you take in your partner's energy. So you have to be very conscious of who you give your energy to, who you allow into your field, and what history are they bringing into your reality too. So it's part of wanting to grow and elevate with someone.
What history you're bringing into your reality? Say that, explain that.
When we meet someone, we also start entangling with their own history too.
Oh, shit.
Their baggage, their energy, their field, it's supportive of every experience that they've been through. So if we choose them, we also choose their entire past, everything that's made them who they are. So
Through
if we're ready
to...
Exactly. If we're ready to embrace that, we have to take on what they're bringing, the entire shebang, the whole package. Right?
So, why have I made the choices? No, I'm just kidding. Okay. It's all good. I think the most beautiful thing is that no matter how challenging any one of them is, essentially, actually, the more challenging, the more lesson there is in it. The more growth, the more expansion.
That's right. But hopefully love is more than just providing a lesson, something to learn from, right? So many people are in relationships where it seems like they're just struggling. They're trying to fix their partner, trying to work through issues. They're not seen. They're not recognized. And very often what we manifest is what we experienced in our childhood. Another very important point to understand. If we were not loved, if we were not seen, we're going to manifest a partner who does the same thing, who negates our needs, who's not there for us, and we believe that that is our reality, that that's what we're worthy of. And so we become used to that treatment, and we validate abuse because of our own internal abuse. And we also manifest our parents in other bodies through our partners often because we're still wanting to gain that validation, which we're never really going to get. So what we really need to be understanding is, how do we get to that point where our primary relationship is with ourselves and with source, with truth, with the values, where we could totally be ourselves, and then we just won't let somebody into our field who doesn't see us completely, where we're not scared of showing ourselves completely, which means that our reality is going to be shared authentically with our partner. If there's anything that we're hiding, there's going to be this dichotomy between, our truth and what we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And there's always going to be disappointment because they're not going to see us, and we still want to be seen, but we also are refusing to be intimate, because without self-intimacy, it's never going to be a factor of play in our relationship.
Let's talk for a second about the other intimacy. I'm just finishing up a book. It's the Mary Magdalene manuscript, or the Magdalene manuscript, about the cult of Horus and Isis and sex magic. And it's fascinating. Have you read it?
I did read it, actually.
What'd you think?
Very interesting. Very interesting stuff. One of the really interesting points in there was that we can experience our alchemical union either through a partner or through ourselves.
Right.
And there are different paths. And many people believe that there has to be this journey through somebody else, the meeting of a divine partner who catalyzes the great inner growth journey, and we learn all the lessons through them. But oftentimes there has to be an inner union first and foremost in order to experience the catalysis that needs to invite that person in.
Yes.
So really the lesson is that it's all about personal growth. It's all about revealing shadow and the elements of ourselves that need to be transmuted in order to hold space for that divine love, that reality of true harmony and integration. And we can't rush this process. Really, the alchemical union is occurring through a lifetime within ourselves. Everyone's going through it. Everyone's learning the lesson of love. Everyone's learning this through their partners, their friends and family and their parents. It's always happening. Sex alchemy is a really powerful, potent way to catalyze this because it often involves the Kundalini rising, and that can be a massive shift. It gives you a whole EMF field upgrade and usually opens up third eye and the crown chakra, and you end up with more downloads flooding into your reality and just experiencing a totally different world because you have been primed to receive sort of those higher frame rates of consciousness. You can see past the veil once you've experienced that depth of an interaction, which quite literally, makes you experience a whole new world right away.
Yeah.
But that can't be sort of the goal. That can't be that we're just trying to manifest a relationship just to experience that alchemical union. I think the focus really needs to be on that inner intimacy, that reality of truth, that knowing, are you embodying that divine feminine spark, or are you in that masculine energy and all the elements and qualities that requires to experience your divine union within you? That should be the priority.
Yeah. I 100% agree. In the book, it does articulate how important it is that the union is authentic, right? It's just this isn't just like a vessel. It's a truthful union where you both have to be honest and vulnerable and in integrity and in love, essentially. But yeah, I mean, for those who don't know, it's basically like it opens up with the transmission from Mary Magdalene about her experience and how she was taught in the school of Isis that how to strengthen the Ka body, which is essentially the energetic body that exists right outside of us, and that using sex and an orgasm to basically take the energy that is happening down below and shoot it up, the energy up your spine through all the channels, through all the chakras, to essentially heighten that field, and then ultimately being able to manifest things more in that state. If you're thinking about them, it basically heightens anything going on and anything that you're thinking about. Am I getting that kind of right?
Yeah, totally. It's super powerful and transcendental, the experience of having the whole chakra activation, the Kundalini rising, and feeling like you're quite literally as one with the divine. It puts you in this state that you're a clear channel. And at that point, you start to receive more energy, become very attuned to your surroundings. But I would caution people who are really fantasizing about this concept of the Kundalini awakening, because many people who end up manifesting the experience, they have a lot of after effects that they were not expecting.
Oh, really?
A lot of people, they even try to create the Kundalini awakening through yoga, through some force exercises, which just stimulate the energy and the opening of those chakra points. It can be very overwhelming. A lot of people experience some psychotic episodes, mental issues after going through something like that. Lots of energy, lots of inner heat. It feels like your life is just, it's been pivoted. There's a before and after moment after having that experience, because you have to be ready.
Yeah.
I recommend not trying to manifest it is one thing. If it's something that you've heard about that is cool, but you don't know if you should experience it, let it come naturally. If there's a time for that energy to activate, it's going to activate. It might come in a spontaneous burst. It might come with a partner. It might come, well, it definitely will come when you're ready. And they're usually, I mean, if we think about it as like the intention behind that energy, it's really, really creative life force potentiality. The reason we experience an awakening like that is to prime ourselves to be a vessel for our purpose, for our mission here. It gives you the ability to receive, to really be a conduit of the divine, which means that you need to be ready for stepping into that mission. If you're still trying to not be on your path when you go through an awakening like that, You're going to be very confused. You're going to be like, how can I turn this off? It was cool for some time, had a great orgasm, but then after that, there's too many after effects. That's kind of the reality that we have to understand, that you cannot play with things like this. This energy is highly powerful, and you have to really trust yourself to go through the process on time and as it should happen.
So maybe what I'm hearing is that there's nothing to do. Life is doing you.
In many ways, yeah. It's
So
always...
if someone wanted, because if somebody's still in there listening and they're really curious about this stuff, they might be thinking, they want to figure out how they can elevate, how they can raise their frequency, how they can strengthen that field, how they can be quantum leap, jump timelines. So is there anything to do, or is it purely having the intention that you want to do that enough for the universe to go, okay, and then do you just let it go? Or are there actual active practices that you can put into your life that are going to help accelerate things?
Well, there's a lot of work to be done within everyone, but I feel like we could learn to see that the universe is teaching us what to do through everything that comes into our lives. The lessons are all around us. The teacher is you and life itself. Through everything that you're meeting in your reality, there's always a lesson to be learned. And one of the most potent ways to approach this is to just see that every trigger is pointing you towards something that you need to work on. And most of us, there's plenty of triggers. There's no shortage of, things to be looking at within yourself. If mainly it's something that's troubling you with your relationships, usually the lesson is to think about, how do you feel about yourself? And just turning it from an external obstacle that you're trying to meet into something that you're internally understanding. What is the root of that issue? And that's the premise that I always try to remind people, is really this entire simulation is a reflection of you. This is a divine mirror of consciousness. So when it comes to anything, there's a source that exists within yourself. With health issues, it's a very good way to look at this, because every problem has a psychosomatic root cause. Everything is pointing us towards something that we need to understand, which has an emotional and an energetic basis. So we can think about something like a headache, for example, as like, what is that actually pointing us towards that we're experiencing, or what are we suppressing? When did that headache begin? Why does it happen? What is the stimulus and what is the underlying reason for it? We tend to be in this process of just trying to achieve a better result, a better outcome, which means the lack of that pain, or more of something that we think we need in order to experience more harmony, more happiness, more alignment, and want to add stuff in, which I believe is a major issue with the popular law of attraction, manifestation teachings. Many people, they enter this space, spirituality, because they go through disappointment in life, some kind of suffering, some feeling that they're out of alignment, they don't have what they want, they're in the wrong situation at the wrong time, and so they want to manifest change. So there's this internal reality going on of where you think, how can I bring this into my life, which I think I need in order to be happier, to experience a better reality? There's no understanding or acceptance of the reality that you're currently in and why it is what you're experiencing. And that's what has to happen for the manifestation to unfold. There has to be a coming to terms with where you are. Right. It's a feeling of like, I'm exactly where I need to be. And if I'm not understanding that, then I need to resolve all the things that have happened to me before that put me exactly where I am. And so it's coming into this alignment of like, yeah, everything is happening exactly as it's supposed to. But if we're still not recognizing that, there's more inner resolve to be had. And that brings us the experiences and the lessons, often through different people, through synchronicities. As soon as we set that intention, it's going to be everywhere. The resources are endless. The videos are going to be popping up on YouTube, the different advice, the different methods and everything. But more importantly, it's listening to ourselves and choosing the values that we want to espouse in our day-to-day lives. If we want to have integrity, we need to approach ourselves and everyone else with integrity. If we want to be loved, we have to be loved for ourselves. If we want a world of kindness, we have to start embodying that kindness. It's really these simple things, but so many people are externally chasing some reality which they don't even believe in because they're not choosing to become that way.
Sure.
And so we have to make that choice.
You got to be a match. Make yourself a match.
Totally. A vibrational match.
Yeah. So then what's the ultimate point then of this individual life itself? And does that just, could that even continue into what is the point of it all? Because it could be more macro, like, oh, it's to make your next reincarnation something, the next step further, or maybe it's to become a different entity that's not in this reality. Maybe it's to get back to source. Like, from your perspective, what is the point of going through the pain?
I think the point is to just come into the state of the awareness. It's dissolving all of the resistance to why it happened to get to the point that you are the awareness that chose the experience, and you can fully come into alignment with the experience to dissolve the pain. That's what leads to the dissolution of pain and suffering. Suffering is really just the accumulation of pain that you haven't observed and haven't come into alignment with. Yep. That's often what I tell people. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Are we going to choose to see the pain and acknowledge the resistance and heal the triggers and go into the shadow and see everyone else's expressions of ourselves? Or are we going to still keep denying that essential reality that we know deep down to be true? And so there is no point. There's no destination. I'd say, ironically, kind of the destination is the point where you're not seeking the destination anymore.
Yeah.
It's where it's just isness. It's just everything is, and you're just happy with it being the way that it is. You come into that point. If we think about what would God be doing? What would God consciousness be experiencing? A reality of total acceptance, peace, and just, happy with the way things are. Even if there are certain things that we don't like, this doesn't mean that we, ignore the bad things that happen in life. A lot of people, they come into conflict with this awareness because they think, what bad things are still happening to good people, and there's ugly things in the world, and how do we reconcile that? Well, we have to reconcile it by understanding there's a reason for it to be. There's a reason why it's happening, and we may not be the cause or the effect of that, but we have to learn to coexist with those problems and learn to be the best solution that we can be. We're here to elevate the frequency of the collective. We're here to be the carrier of that truth. The more people that come into this alignment, the better time it'll be for the entire collective. But it takes everyone just being devoted to what they can do. Though it seems we are these small beings that are more of an inconvenience to the planet, like we really could do so much good if we just come to embody our purpose and realize that let's not cause any more problems for ourselves and other people. We can learn to be happy. If we devote ourselves to our own joy, to the pursuit of more happiness through authentic expression and through the knowingness of who we are, we don't come into more contradiction with other people or ourselves. We don't cause pain for anyone else. We don't cause pain for ourselves. And if we think of it as really this entire spectrum of frequency playing out just for the purpose of us learning how to elevate, then it's realizing what it takes to elevate that just changes the game. When life becomes this enjoyable pursuit of more, like we do, just curiously observing, curiously taking in more insight, learning how to live a more harmonious existence, we just dissolve that struggle and come more into alignment with that truth of oneness, which changes everything.
Thank you. Things just happening and having the experience for the experience. If there's anything plant medicine has showed me, is probably that. That's one of the good lessons. It's just things happening, and it's just to be experienced.
And also, what do we do with the experience? What does it change about our worldview? What can we do to be the change we want to see in the world? Everyone can do something. There's so much more that we could be creating, so much more we could be doing. And I think many people have these innate abilities and tendencies and desires to do certain things that we also repress. So really, I see life as it's art. We should be learning to create with our abilities, learning to do different things, to express our superpowers and our magic in different ways, whether it's through dance or singing or through cooking or through sharing with other people, sharing what we're good at and doing it in a beautiful way to just light up the world with our potentiality and exploring also that potential that exists within us. Because so often, even children will have so many of these abilities, which are just shut down. They want to do certain things. Their parents tell them they're inconvenient, and school deprives kids of the ability to do that. So instead, we're fighting in this world where there's no opportunity, no portal for us to experience who we are. And that coming into love really means allowing ourselves to do everything that we want to be doing, becoming that parent for ourselves, to nurture the inner child, to give ourselves the ability to play, to dance, to be happy, to do these things aside from work and the mundane activities of life, to learn what joy is, to learn to feel. We can experience the orgasmic interaction with reality at large, which is really just learning to become attuned to everything, to, wake up in the morning, to experience, to feel the air, to breathe in alignment with yourself, to move your body in a way that feels right, to speak with people in a way that's harmonious to you, to do things, and every little thing can be imbued with more love. But that requires presence. And that's something that people are really at a loss for these days. I think that is the essential key. It's presence, because what consciousness is pure presence. So the destination really could be turned into just the point at which we dissolve all the distractions into pure presence of what is. And what can be is just more presence. How can we be so attuned that we're experiencing the most out of any situation? How can we experience our bodies to the extent that we're feeling every subtle feeling and not letting those feelings grow until there has to be an illness to be manifested for us to understand that we are our own teacher? And every subtle sign and cue is just more cues from the universe to observe more, to feel more, to experience more. That is really the beauty of life, to experience that aliveness through our every motion, through our every interaction with the universe. And just that awareness of what aliveness means really puts us into the state of love. To love every feeling, to love the reason for everything to be, just puts you in then appreciation and gratitude. And so there is an escalation from the states of the lower frequency reality of just resistance, anger, frustration, denial, shame, fear, blame, guilt, all of these low frequency emotions. To transmute them, we have to understand what's on the underside of all those feelings and states. It's a reality that we didn't know was meant to teach us how to experience the exact opposite. The higher frequency dimensions of knowing that that's all meant to teach us more love. We didn't get more hate, more pain in our lives to just be stuck in that pain. We were meant to align with better outcomes by becoming more aligned with what can be.
And ourself. Wow. Thank you, Gabi. That was beautiful. And so it's like, it's so simple, but so hard, and, but if it wasn't, then it might not feel as good either when you finally get to the other side of challenges, right? It's that contrast that really brings it home and makes you feel joy and peace and bliss. Those are some quick eluding but beautiful feelings that you never forget. And that's what it's all about.
We have to ask ourselves, how can we experience more of all of these feelings? It's usually a reality that's like, it's kind of foreign too. We don't necessarily know what it means to feel that deeply. And so what many people are trying to manifest through things is really the state of feeling more of those true emotions. To align with bliss is not just to have things that you think will give you bliss, but it's to first experience the feeling that you want to get you there. So what if we redefine manifestation from the acquisition of things to make us feel to acquiring the ability to feel the feeling, which will get us to where we want to be?
You think the boat's going to give you bliss? It's like, no. What if it's you think it's a boat? Like, no, it's not. It's actually a go-kart, or it's a house full of plants. You didn't know it, but it's totally different delivery than you could ever imagine. And if we just embody the feeling and know how we want to feel and feel it, then the universe delivers what it is that's a match to that.
Right on. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's a long road for all of us, but it's beautiful. And the joy is in the journey. That's for sure. So thank you for teaching and teaching us so much. I can't believe that you're 23, right?
Almost.
Oh my, almost 23.
Yeah.
You're so far out of the curve. It's just crazy, but grateful for that. So good to get to finally meet you. And I'm just like such a fan of your work and your messages. And for those who haven't been introduced to you, they will be glad that they have, and they get to enjoy you from now on, because it's some of the simplest, greatest, heartfelt messaging that I feel like is out there. So thank you
so much.
Thanks everybody for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.